Why Sekiro is too hard. Examining the skill issue. Is Sekiro too hard? I don't think so. I think it's as hard as the developers wanted it to be. Is it too hard for some people? Yes, absolutely. So is, in a sense, Dark Souls, I suppose. But Sekiro is, I think, one of the hardest Dark FromSoft games. Much harder than Elden Ring, much harder than any of the Dark Souls games. I can't think of a game harder than Sekiro off the top of my head. Hmm. I think by that logic alone, that does have some merit. Sekiro, I think, is the hardest game I've ever played. In terms of like how much skill is actually needed to beat the game. I think every game kind of has a skill ceiling if you think about it. Like there's a like minimum amount of skill to beat the game, which is usually not much for most games. And then there's like the high skill ceiling of a game where it's like pro gamers, speedrunners, all that stuff. Where it's like you could take the game to a whole nother level. I think one of the problems with Sekiro is that that's minimum skill level is usually the skill ceiling for some games. Not all, but for I would say a good majority of games. So it's like if you're a really good gamer, Sekiro is not going to be that hard. In fact, it'd probably be kind of easy because it's all about timing. But for majority of the people who play games, they're not out to look for that skill ceiling. They're just out to play a fun game. You know what I mean? So if that is what FromSoft was going for, then great. They really nailed it. Um, but I can definitely see why a lot of people would see Sekiro as like just stupidly hard. I don't know. I like the game, but I liked it despite its difficulty. I think is the difference. Like if it was not as fun and not like as interesting, like I really like the game itself, like a lot of the things in the game. But I would say I don't really like games that focus on parrying, just because I don't really like it. Like I'm very aggressive in my gameplay. So when it's a game like all about parrying, like it's just annoying to me. So it's like I like Sekiro, but not because of its combat. In fact, I would say it's one of my least favorite games in terms of that, just because I'm not a fan of parrying mechanics. I don't think they're bad. Like I don't think a game shouldn't have them. I just don't like it when it's like basically required. But yeah, let's take a look. It's like old school vibe here. About to skip ahead. That is like the longest
All
intro
right.
I've seen.
Game of the year winner is Elden Ring.
I don't think it's inaccurate to say that Elden Ring propelled From Software to even higher heights than they were previously resting at. Just look at the numbers alone. It sold 12 million units in its first 2 months on the market. Meanwhile, lifetime sales of Dark Souls 3 sits at around 10.
I usually don't say things about appearance, but man, like I'm not saying my PNG is any good because it's really not. But I think if you're gonna do that to your avatar's face, it looks weird. It looks weird. Obviously you have a beard, but it's like I don't know. I think you should have looked into how cartoons do beards because I don't know why that looks just so weird to me.
10 million today. It sold so well, in fact, that for their next game, they said, F you, we're making a new game in our long dormant franchise, thanks for the money, ass. Elden Ring took the formula that From.
I mean, Armored Core. I've never. I was a fan of them back in like I think middle school. I'm just not into like games with big robots anymore. Like it's not as fun as it used to be. But I would play it. Like if they do good with it. I mean, I remember there was this one robot game on Xbox. I freaking loved it. I can't remember the name anymore. It was like a weird like Asian-ish game. I'm not saying the game was like in Asia or anything, but like there were some things that were specifically, I would say, from Japan Um, man, what was the freaking name called? It's like your robot could go invisible. Like I remember one of the builds because you can obviously like deck out your robot in like weird things. And one of the like builds I did for my robot was like I went invisible, but I did it with like a drill. So it would like freaking hide out somewhere, and then when someone would run by, I would just freaking stab in the back with the drill, and like almost instant kill them almost every time. Man, that was such a fun game. I'm gonna try to find out what that was called. I don't remember anymore.
Has been using to the next level, and it was a
Hopefully Armored
fantastic
Core is like that,
introduction
though.
to the Souls games for tons of people. But as I've said in its own dedicated video, it's not my favorite from Miyazaki and his team. I would definitely agree that it deserves the award it got, but I don't.
I would disagree. I think Elden Ring is my favorite FromSoft's game. Do I? Yeah, I would disagree. I think Elden Ring is my favorite. Just because it's like it's one of the I do like games that have the option to make it harder or easier. Just really on how much you want to do. Like you can go a naked run, a no hit run. You can also like do it where it's just like a very specific build. Like it's just the variety of ways you can play Elden Ring to me is what makes it so good. And actually why I like Dark Souls games as well.
don't think I'd put it in even my second place on From Software's tier list. The things that make Elden Ring a proper evolution are apparent to anyone who played it with the knowledge of the previous Souls games, but these positives could easily go unnoticed by first-timers of the series. Most of these additions do a wonderful job in making the game more accessible. It might not have specifically been the goal for some of these inclusions, but they contributed nonetheless. They're all things that make Elden Ring the most free form of all the Souls games. So let's put them in a fun little numbered list so it'll be easier to digest. Number 1, dedicated RPG mechanics are everywhere you turn, pushed to the forefront more so than ever before. Number 2, the moveset for every character is
RPG mechanics are everywhere. I'm not sure what he means by this. As in like collectibles and crafting? Because I'll be honest, I didn't do shit with with my crafting. With Elden Ring. I know you can craft, I just never freaking used it. The moveset is very simple. Isn't that the same with all Dark Souls games? Am I missing something? I don't remember them being that crazy. I think Bloodborne had like a kind of complex moveset, sorry. I'm not sure. I have a kitten in my arms who is demanding attention. So if I'm away from the mic, that is why.
extremely simple. Number 3, Elden Ring, like the Souls games before it, always had ways around difficulty if you were willing
There's
to.
always a way around the challenge. Most challenges I would say yes. There are some where you kind of have to do it. You know what I mean? If you want to beat the game, at least. So technically, I mean, you can go and like farm levels and stuff, but you're still gonna have to come back and do the challenge.
Look, it seems like these days every game needs a leveling system to keep some audiences engaged, even if the game doesn't really benefit from it. But Elden Ring makes a bit more sense seeing as how it feeds directly into its weapons and ability systems. The player has the freedom to wield a variety of weapons or skills and adopt several playstyles at any given time. You could take a
Well, the reason why leveling is in a lot of games is because people like it. That's really what it is, man. They wouldn't have been in games since like freaking Nintendo days till now if like people didn't like the mechanic.
ranged approach with archery or magic, or you could go full-on Ungo Bungo with a heavy weapon.
And the only thing you'll need to do is make sure your character is appropriately strong or dexterous.
How do we do that? We level up. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of grinding. Yes, here they are, ladies, the virgins I promised. The variety.
Okay. Yeah. But at the same time, grinding is just a game term for what people do anyways. Like whether you're studying for an exam, you're gonna reread things you've done before. It's the same thing.
and character builds helped keep multiple playthroughs fresh and every crowd of player looked after. Isn't it crazy to think about how from Demon Souls to Elden Ring, the only thing that has been added as far as the base character's moveset is a jump button? Dodge rolling is the same, light and heavy attacks are the same, and no, weapon arts don't count. They're
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, you can keep things simple. That's fine.
Basically just another heavy attack. This means that complexity of the interactions the player has with the world are via everything else. Bosses, especially today, host some of the most intricate movesets that are out there for these larger enemies. And for there to be
Yeah.
so many unique ones in these games, it's insane. But the way around these movesets, no matter the shape, size, or speed, will always be the same. This thing right here. The bosses with these extravagant combos are something to behold, but the way around these combos is typically to press that button at the right time. Even still, it doesn't stop them from kicking me down and calling me.
To be fair, there's been people who are good enough that they can beat most of these bosses without even dodging. So it's I don't know what to tell you, man. Like dodging isn't exactly required, but it does definitely make the game easier.
Names all the time. Bosses or arenas that prove to be too much for you can usually be circumvented in some kind of way, sometimes quite literally by the way of an alternative path that takes the player to another challenge altogether, or getting into the right grind.
Yeah, I mean, that like I said, that's true, but there are some that is just literally you have to do them. So unless you glitch out the game, which I don't count, like I don't count those because it wasn't intended by the developer.
Set and fighting smaller enemies repeatedly to just get stronger. There are even a couple of bosses in this series that give you a weapon built for doing absurd amounts of damage to a specific boss. Oh, and how could we forget the online functionality? If you're struggling.
To be fair, that boss, I think without the weapon is probably one of the hardest bosses in the game when you first run into it. Is it at least for me? Because he was like one-shotted me. Like, I was like going like a magic-ish build when I first did Elden Ring, and like, dude, he has like crazy huge attacks that were really hard to dodge, and he was just one-shotting me. I didn't even use the weapon. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I used it on my second run, and it was just like, what the hell? Like, this is so much easier.
Against any boss, you can literally bring 2 other players in to help you take them down. Or you can base your build around AI-controlled Ashes of War. My point with all of this is, Elden Ring has a lot of things built into its world and how the game is crafted to help you get through it if you need it. It's great at extending that helping hand. But to circle around and get back on track, you want to know what Sekiro does to that helping hand?
If that's your argument on why Sekiro was the best game, honestly, man, I might have to dislike your video. I don't want to, but if that's all you have, that's a absolutely garbage reason to think Sekiro is the best game, is because it doesn't give you options.
Sekiro is one of my favorite games ever made, and my favorite by From Software by a landslide. But that's not how everyone feels about it. During the game's launch window, it actually sparked a new discussion.
I think it's one of the least favorited games from Soft. I personally love the game, but like I said, that's despite me hating the parry mechanic. Even though that's like the main thing about the game is the parry mechanics, because I don't like parry mechanics. I think they did it probably the best of any game I've ever played. I'm trying to think here. I think the only other game that might be a little better is like Dead or Alive. Because Dead or Alive had like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like things more to it. Like if you played Dead or Alive, I think like what 3 or I forget which one I played. It was on Xbox. I just remember that. Played it with my family. Like there were some characters who like were specifically designed around the parry mechanic, and a lot of their move sets, like combos and stuff, were kind of designed with the parry mechanic, which is the only reason why I think it was slightly better than Sekiro's. But in terms of like the smoothness of parrying, I think Sekiro was like number one. Like absolutely.
Online about how difficult games.
So if it was like I'm assuming this dude really likes parrying, which would make sense on why Sekiro is his number one game. Absolutely. I don't think it should be the number one because of that, but if like you like parrying, then it makes sense.
Games should actually be, and whether or not they should all have some sort of easy mode. Needless to say, Sekiro had its enemies who claimed the game was too hard, but I'm here to tell you, it's not. Now, before you go down to the comments and type your very original.
Yeah, it's too hard. for most people. Not most, I would say. Unless the thing with Sekiro though, and why I think it's like the conversation even comes into play, because Sekiro doesn't give you other options. You either learn how to parry and do it well, or you're fucked.
And not at all derogatory response to that statement, I'd like to offer a helping hand. I will do this by telling you how much I love you, and remind you how good you are at other games. I say this because all you likely need are some pointers on how to deal with Sekiro's unique brand of everything. It has a very steep learning curve, and unlike our crowd favorite Elden Ring, there aren't a lot of concrete ways around this difficulty. None of those bullet points that we discussed pertaining to freedom or grinding are present at all in Sekiro.
Grinding, yeah. Because if you grind, like the term grinding, like dude, that's just you doing something over and over again, basically. Like if you're grinding in terms of trying to master the parry mechanic, that's also grinding.
Wolf's toolkit is not simple. He has a block and a parry, he has a jump, several defensive moves, some optional moves that actually make a huge difference like wall kicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's what he's saying is true, but at the same time, not really true. Because that's if you can just master the parrying system, Sekiro is actually pretty damn easy.
Grappling hook
Not even master, if you get pretty good at it.
that has several uses in and out of combat, and the Shinobi prosthetic is the only thing that gives the player any kind of freedom in their loadout. Stealth is typically
much.
only good for giving you a shorter fight or less enemies to deal with if you know the specific ways you can use it, because otherwise stealth is just... it don't work so good. And there are far fewer opportunities to get around or ignore encounters that you're not prepared for. There are only a few optional encounters and only a few that can be ignored. Sekiro has things that it demands you learn, benchmarks it wants you to hit before you're allowed to continue playing. And a lot of players unfortunately can't pass these benchmarks, and when they can't pass them, they blame the game.
They should. What are you talking about? I mean, yes, it's also their fault as well, but it is the game's fault. It's not like they put those benchmarks in there. So absolutely, you should blame the game. You should also blame yourself a bit. Not even a bit. I think it's like 50-50, right? Because it's like, yeah, you should, if you want to play the game further, you need to get better at a certain system. And let's be fair, he keeps adding in here like there's more than one way. There really isn't. It's just parrying. If you cannot get the parry system down, the game is basically impossible. So, I mean, you crank up the difficulty by like 10 times by not being able to get the parrying system down.
Be the first one to
Parry
admit
slash block.
Sekiro is far from perfect, don't get me wrong. There are a few bosses that I'm not a fan of and a couple of instances that I think could have used some revision. But no game is perfect. But I think people often try to take Sekiro like the Souls games that came before it. And when they do that, what do you think they attempt in order to get past every attack? They dodge or try to evade. And the same thing happens just about every time. Because that's not how Sekiro works. The game pretty early on teaches you that the golden child is not the B or circle button. Parrying is how you're going to make headway here. Every move that isn't prefaced by a red kanji and that violin screech can be parried. Attacks of all kinds, regular swings from a foot soldier, physical hand-to-hand fisticuffs, giant sweeping moves from a larger than normal enemy, it's all supposed to be pushed back on them repeatedly. And it's not just that these moves can be parried, that is the preferred action for the player to take, because every successful perfect parry...
He says preferred, but even that video, like, it's way, way harder if you don't. So, I mean, it's in a sense it's preferred, but at the same time, it's like, you have to be way, 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 way better than average if you're going to do a no parry run. Like, that's what I was talking about in terms of why I like Dark Souls games, is because it doesn't, force you to play the game in a very certain way. Like you can go, archer, magic, melee, and even the melee has a bunch of flavors. So well, not really the archer, but the magic has a bunch of flavors in terms of like what build you want to go. So, and that to me has always been the best thing about like FromSoft games. Like I know people say like, oh, the difficulty, but honestly, I don't give a shit. Like, I'll play a hard game, but if it's not fun, I'm not gonna play it. Jump King, hard game in a sense. It's pretty hard, but it doesn't look fun to me. It looks frustrating, so I've never bothered with it. But if it looked fun, I'd at least try it.
Damages the enemy's posture. The posture meter is personally one of my favorite game mechanics to have ever been devised. It builds up as the player deflects blow after blow, and once it's been filled, a death blow will become available, emptying the enemy's health bar entirely. It makes fight.
It's basically the poise system. I don't know why he thinks it's like this crazy cool thing. It's no, a lot of games did it. The activation of it's different. You have to parry a bunch, but think about 64 games. How many times did you run into a boss where you had to do this specific mechanic over and over until it like the boss went into like a weakened phase and you'd come up and just beat the hell out of it, or you could do a special move on it. A lot of games did it before Sekiro. Sekiro, I think, is maybe one of the first ones that did it with the parry one. So I think even Zelda did it back on these, what, not Link to the Past. What Zelda was it? Ocarina of Time, where you have to do it with the, I think Ganon, like at the very end. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure where you like hit an arrow to him or something, he reflects it, then you reflect it back, and so forth. But yeah,
It's more than just a battle of attrition to empty a red bar, it morphs it into a race of sorts. The posture meter can
it's basically the same thing, dude. Like, it's imagine if the health and then it had phases to that health. Like you take out the bar and it goes to the next phase, the health bar. It's kind of the same thing, except for the health bar maybe can regenerate.
recover if the enemy is left alone for too long,
Yeah.
rewarding players for adopting the most aggressive playstyles possible, keeping damage.
No, it doesn't reward like super aggressive playstyles. It rewards very like that's he's confusing aggressiveness with reaction and timing. That's not really being super aggressive. It rewards people who know the enemy's moveset like the back of their hand. In which case, if you can time those parries over and over and over off of every attack, that's not to me that's not aggressiveness. That's just you knowing the enemy,
On the
which is fine. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's different.
enemy is also beneficial because a damaged health bar will inhibit the posture meter's ability to recover, getting slower and slower the more life that's been drained. But easily, the one thing that makes the posture meter work above all else are the special counter opportunities that every enemy type has built into their movesets. These maneuvers build up substantial amounts of posture damage, and this part can't be understated, feel immensely satisfying to successfully perform. The Mikiri counter is good for shutting down all sorts of thrust attacks. Sweep attacks can be jumped over and then kick jumped off of. And then there's the lightning counter, a maneuver that I will still argue is taught to the player at a very inappropriate time. But even still, after you've learned the ability and can take advantage of it, it's extremely effective for posture and health damage. The combination of Wolf's abilities, the enemy's abilities, and the posture meter create a beautiful dance that is perfect for player expression. I genuinely think Sekiro has one of the most interesting combat systems out there, asking players to focus on their offensive strikes but also turn their defense back into offense for the best results. Never giving enemies a break and using every one of their biggest attacks against them. But players have to be constantly searching for better ways to deal with attacks. You can parry that strong overhead attack, but it pushes Wolf back and doesn't allow for an ideal follow-up. It's even more effective if you can dodge at the last second and get a few hits in while they're off guard. For players who can get a hold of these new fast-paced objectives during combat, it can feel amazing. Like you're amongst those who just get exactly what the game wanted you to. Meanwhile, everyone else is writing articles about how Sekiro isn't a good version of a game it was never trying to be. Sekiro doesn't pull.
Oh yeah, I don't think most people who played Sekiro would argue that. I think the problem is most people who say a Sekiro isn't a bad game or is too hard, either doesn't like or doesn't know how to work the parry system. Personally, it's my least favorite game among the FromSoft games. That's not true. I like it more than I would say Dark Souls 2. But I don't like parrying in games. I don't. I don't know. Maybe something's wrong with me, but I've never been a fan of it in any game, including Sekiro. So that immediately just made it not as much of a good game as it could be, at least in my eyes. Because like I said, I like experimenting. I like trying different builds. Sekiro, you kind of have one build with different flavors to it. Obviously, not every parry is the same, but to be fair, it's still a parry. It'd be like if Elden Ring had only magic, but you had like 12 spells to pick from. Like, yes, you have 12 spells, but you were stuck with a magic build. Like, it to me just wouldn't be as fun.
Pull its punches when it comes to introducing new players to these new goals. Again, I don't think it explains everything in the best possible way, but when it works, it really does.
It really doesn't.
And it's at its best when the player feels like they've created their own paths around rough enemy attacks. It's very easy to see why Elden Ring was far more successful, and of course, don't take this as me saying Elden Ring is devoid of good challenges. It's obviously an extremely tough game, and saying anything less would just be incorrect. But as I've shown, it's just easier to bypass the game's challenge in some sort of way.
Why is that bad? You don't have to do it, dude. No one is forcing you to summon people to help you. You play the game how you want it. I think options are better than not having options. So the fact that you think because there were options in Elden Ring that made the game slightly easier, not even slightly, could be a lot easier depending on what you're doing, that's a bad thing. I completely disagree.
Way other than grind the movesets and push your head against these walls. There are plenty of spells and powerful weapons that can be acquired pretty early on if you make a beeline to them, making it really easy to push over what would have been a difficult boss. And I mean, hey, if you are just that stubborn, you can power level yourself to oblivion pretty easily. There are several spots that give you large soul payouts for minimal effort. Meanwhile, our favorite shinobi...
Okay, so a lot of his arguments are just straight stupid. Because the whole big argument he's making is if you do a lot of research, you do all this extra work, you can make Elden Ring easier. You can do the same thing with Sekiro with cheat engine or some kind of, I don't know, cheat, whatever, like cheats basically. You can cheat in Sekiro. I haven't, but I've played enough PC games to know that is probably not even remotely hard to do. I probably just quick Google Sekiro cheats, or I know cheat engine is pretty popular on PC, so that takes less time than what he's saying. So I don't know where the argument's coming in here.
has to do things the real way just about every time. Character progression in Sekiro is beholden to unlocking different moves or weapons to give you more options. And the only way to get flat out stronger is by defeating the bosses you'd want to use those boosted strength on. Meaning that sooner or later, Wolf will be planting his feet and whittling down these bosses' posture. Defeating enemies will reward Wolf with skill points you can use to unlock some mostly pointless abilities. Some of these attacks are neat, but the only one I will ever consistently use is Mortal Draw. The attacks always seem to interrupt the flow of the fight, and only a few make for good additions to Wolf's moveset. And in a similar vein, there are...
That's because his moveset is primarily focused on parrying. Like, that's... Dude. That's what I meant. Like, he doesn't understand the difference between aggressiveness and knowing, like, an enemy moveset and getting the timing right for the parrying. You know, because if it was just aggressiveness, then yeah, having those extra movesets would be fine. But it's not, because the game is all about parrying.
Shinobi prosthetics that make specific fights easier
Primarily
if you know what to
parrying.
use, but I find them to be inconsistent. The firecrackers only momentarily stun specific enemies. I hate the shaman enemies because you basically have to rely on the lapis shield.
And the flame vent is great for stunning some of the more feral enemies, but again, it's only a momentary stun.
The prosthetic tools are nice to have at best, and at their worst actively distract from the flow of the fight and can leave me vulnerable. The best prosthetics to me are the ones that give the player legitimately useful attacks to use. A long-range shuriken, a spring-loaded spear, or an axe for dealing with certain enemies. I would say that this is the biggest wedge that's been driven between casual Souls players and Sekiro enthusiasts. Elden Ring and the other Souls games can be overcome by problem solving and exploration a lot of the time. But Sekiro has to be overcome by mechanical skill. Understanding how the game is supposed to be played and mastering that playstyle is paramount. It's not for everyone, and I mean, I know a lot of people who never truly clicked with it. My best friend Nick, my friends from the Goodnight groups, some people just can't accept the parry or the advanced mechanics and how much they need to be used. I think Nick described
It's not that they can't accept it, dude. They just don't want to do it. Like, just because you like a system doesn't mean everyone else is going to feel the same about that system. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's just not for them.
it best when he says,
At the end of the day, I feel like Sekiro just has everyone fooled into thinking that this is just your regular action adventure game. But the reality of it all is it's basically like Guitar Hero set on expert from the jump. And your special moves and prosthetics is just like a temporary star power you can use. And at the end of the day, your end goal for Sekiro is just, can I beat this boss without missing a note?
Josh, who has gone on record as an Elden Ring simp on the path back to the light, thankfully, had this to say.
So I think I've just come to terms with it. I'm glad it exists, but it's not for me. In Dark Souls games, you can basically force the game to play to your will because they give you the options to. You can't do that in Sekiro. You have to play how the game has dictated it to you because it's different than Dark Souls, and it just doesn't suit how I like to play. I don't like parrying. I don't like the way the gameplay feels. I think it's good. I think all the praise.
Oh, I think the gameplay itself is fantastic. Like, take away the requirement to parry, and the game to me would become much better. Like, for example, if your attacks did way more, like, not damage exactly, but I think that's the easiest way to phrase it, to the poise bar, or, you know, whatever they call it in Sekiro, where, you know, it breaks their guard. I think that would make the game just much better. Basically have it where parrying is no longer a requirement, pretty much. I mean, obviously, we saw the video. It's not exactly a requirement, but damn does the game get stupidly hard if you don't parry. And I think that's really the big issue. Because it's like, yeah, if you like parrying, Sekiro is going to be the golden child in your eyes. Like, it's going to be awesome. Perfect. Because I think everything outside of the parry system is, at least to me, amazing. I love it. That's why I said I love the game despite the parry system, just because I don't like it.
It received is warranted and great. I just don't think it's for me.
Matt, who doesn't frequent From Software's games, had an interesting view on the subject as well.
It's just not a game that I would ever play. I know that I wouldn't have a good time. I would get way too frustrated. I've said many times, I love video games, but I'm not good at them in that way. I don't have the patience to hit my head against the wall to get better at a particular game. Like, that type of challenge in video games, I don't personally value that. Like, the repetitive trying to do something over and over again until you finally get it.
And Mike, everybody's favorite boy genius, had very similar things to say.
It's a good game that I'm really bad at. I wouldn't even say that I'm bad at it. I just haven't really put in much time in Sekiro. I got to the big drunk guy who beat the living shit out of me repeatedly, and I was like, I'm done.
Yeah, that was one of the fights where I really had to accept that to play the game further, I needed to get the parry system down. Like, prior to that, I kind of just pushed through off of sheer, like, cheesing things, if I'm going to be honest. But what the fight he's talking about, I forget the name of the guy, but the big fat guy who was just sitting when you first come up to him, it was like the house is on fire, you're coming out of a well, and you're about to go on to the next part, and this dude is just sitting in front of the door. Yeah, that fight really was like, okay. I mean, I did it. Like, I got the parry system down so I could beat the game. But man, that was a tough pill to swallow because I do not like parrying.
I'm good.
Yep, that's exactly where I quit.
Experienced enough of this.
Josh and Mike both told me, essentially, it's not that it's too difficult, it's that it's too different, and I don't feel like learning the systems because I don't want to put the work in. Which that came off a little more hostile. I've noticed that those who enjoy From Software's adventures tend to latch onto one or two games that they particularly resonate with. Like, yeah, we can all agree that good game, good game, good game, good game, good game.
I mean, that's actually a really good thing I was just remembering. Like, with the whole aggressiveness, Bloodborne rewards aggressive playstyle. Sekiro does not. It's two different things. But Bloodborne really, like, I think Bloodborne's probably my favorite. It's hard to say because I think Bloodborne just doesn't have. It feels like it doesn't have as much content as the other ones, but I really, really do like Bloodborne's like aggressive gameplay. And if you want to do parries, perfectly fine. In fact, it does really help you defeating bosses quicker. But at the same time, it's not necessary whatsoever. You can do the whole game without parrying once. Like sometimes I'll parry in Bloodborne just because it's like I want to do it, but it's never been a case where it's like I have to do this to beat this boss.
But we
I don't know. I like Dark Souls too. I thought it was fun. You know what? Here's the thing. It's probably the worst Dark Souls, but at the same time, it's better than most games. So to me, that's fine. Like I really like Dark Souls 3. I think Dark Souls 3 is probably my favorite of the Dark Souls. But Elden Ring, I think, is my favorite game, or at least of the from Soft. But Dark Souls 2, I thought it was good. I mean, it wasn't as good as the other ones, but it's better than other games out there. So
all have ones that we really vibe with. For me, I'd say it was my first Dark Souls game, Dark Souls 3, and Sekiro due to how firmly it grabbed me and then gave me a titty twister. But everyone is different. Some people really love Bloodborne. Some people really enjoy Demon Souls. Sekiro is just that one oddball that forgoes.
Hey, why are you making fun of Bloodborne, man? I love Bloodborne. I think, I don't know.
Pretty
I
much
felt like he was making fun
everything
of me.
they had built themselves on up until that point. No more RPG mechanics, no more simple methods of dodging attacks.
To be fair, even with Dark Souls, like having a high level isn't really all that great. Unless you're pumping everything into Vitality or something, like where your health is like much higher. But even then, at most, you're going to double your health. You know what I mean? At most. But I don't know. I don't feel like that means you could just steamroll through things in Dark Souls. Unless you already know the fights pretty well.
No more crazy character customization. For the first time in a long time, they made a game that you can't weasel your way through. And for those who can actually make it through that weasel hole, I think they finally start to.
That's a kind of dumb thing to say, man. Like, it's not weaseling your way through. It's a type of gameplay. For example, with Elden Ring, right? You're a magic user. You kind of have to get your timing down. You can't just because magic you have to stand there. You can't do it on the flow, like on the run. Or like if you're a big heavy weapon user, you know what I mean? You can't just spam attacks. You kind of got to work on your positioning and timing because you're slow. Like they could get hits in while you're trying to get your attack off, which is not good for you. So with Sekiro, the thing is, it's a very specific, in a sense, in that if you can learn the parry system, the game becomes super easy until maybe the late game. Late game is still pretty damn hard, even if you know the parry system pretty well. But at the same time, you can do like 90% of the game relatively easy if you can, I would say, get 3 out of 5 parries. I think you can beat the game fairly easy. Not beat the game, but get through most of it. Because the only fight I think is like truly, truly difficult is, I think the last boss, right? I could be wrong. I'm trying to think on what bosses still gave me trouble after I like sat down and tried to learn the parry system. The only one that really comes to mind is that freaking second phase of the last boss when the dude comes out of the kid's body. Or not kid's body, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I don't remember anything else like really making me like want to destroy my freaking controller.
To understand. Like my first playthrough was such a different experience than the playthrough I ran for this video. I remember getting stuck on Ishin back in 2019. I had gotten so frustrated that I took my anger out on a poor defenseless cup. It was one of the most intense moments I can remember overcoming in a game, ever. But when I go back to Ishin now, it's not a question of whether or not I'll win. It's a question of how flawless the victory will be. I get hit maybe a few times, but I have his timings and attacks internalized at this point. This is the type of high-level play that comes to you naturally when you're on your 8th playthrough of any game. And to me, this showcases the dichotomy between Sekiro and the Souls games. You can replay a Souls game over and over until your stats and weapons are ridiculous, overpowering every boss due to how the New Game Plus works. But with Sekiro, the power-ups you receive from bosses...
I think that's also a stupid argument. A lot of people replay Dark Souls naked. Like, instead of just doing another run, they'll do the run with the less optimal build, or just a whole different build, or they'll do a naked run, where they just have like the starting like club or something like that, or they'll like won't level, or a really difficult one is like the no hit runs. So it's like, to me, it's just kind of a piss poor argument, like, oh, because Dark Souls has a New Game Plus, which I don't think many people even take advantage of. Like, maybe the first one, they'll do like their second run with New Game Plus. But after that, I would see that as really boring, like, personally. So I don't see that many people would want to even do that after their second run, because you're already kind of overpowered at that point.
Are so negligible that I don't even think they make much of a real difference. There aren't really any optional bosses to face to increase your strength, so the game will always know how strong you are. The only thing that you really get to choose are your prosthetic tools, which I've explained aren't good for definitively turning the tide of a fight, and the moves I mentioned aren't going to save you either. None of that really matters though. You replay Sekiro to get better at Sekiro. And yeah, that sounds like a no shit type of thing to say, but it's true. The point is to...
You do that with any game. It's not that you get better at Sekiro, you get better at parrying the enemies in Sekiro. And overall, you probably get better at parrying as well. That you can take over to other games like Bloodborne, for example. But that's any game, dude. Like, I don't know where he's going with this.
To grind enemy movesets, not so that you can eventually be a bigger number than them, but so you can outmaneuver them in your sleep. Becoming intimately familiar with every enemy type is the name of the game here, and my brain has been tainted by this way of thinking. You have the spear guys that are bugged to immediately thrust at the player when they jump, and if you're able to anticipate that, they get an instant posture break. When the headless ape jumps in the air, just stand still and then jump into the air to do a jump kick. The camera will freak out a little bit, but you'll always get the counter. Ishin has a thrust with one of the most strict Mikiri counter timing windows in the game, or using any of the opportunities to take a health bar through stealth in the middle of a fight. Sekiro is just that From Software game that clicked with me. And it's hard. Of course it is, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's much more difficult than the other games I've talked about today. It's hard, but because you're not used to it. It's just a different type of difficulty. The type of difficulty that many of you new fans might not gravitate towards after the freedom of Elden Ring, but it's more than worth it if you can play by their rules this one time.
No, it's not. Well, I won't say it's not, because like, I still really like the game, but to me, if they took out the parry mechanic, the game would just be better. To me. I don't like the parry mechanic. So, is it worth it? I would say yes, but only if you can tolerate the parry mechanic, because that doesn't ever change. From the first boss to the last boss, you're going to be spamming the shit out of that parry mechanic. So, that's going to be your bread and butter of the whole game. So.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, happy Season 6 premiere. I hope you've noticed all the new assets and everything that's different on the channel. We have a new look because
I'm not going to really play the rest of that because it has nothing to do with the extra conversation. But yeah, I mean, I do, like I said said it from the beginning, to like Sekiro, like to see it as your favorite game, you have to be someone who likes parrying, whatever. Like, I have a cousin who really, really, really enjoys that, and I don't think he played Sekiro, but to me, it's like, it makes sense why this would be his favorite game, right? Like, the game is literally designed around the parry mechanic, which is fine. Like, I think that's fine the game exists with that. I just think the overall game was less because of it personally. So, is the game, why is Sekiro too hard? I mean, he didn't even answer it. He's saying it's not. It's a different type of hard. But I do think Sekiro is probably the hardest of the games. only because it doesn't give you options. You either learn the parry mechanic, or you become, or you would have to know these fights to such an insane degree that you could probably do no hit runs in other games. You know what I mean? Like, that's the level of knowledge you would need to do a no parry run. Like, a no parry run is basically a no hit run in other games.